we're going to get ourselves started and recording our webinar. Welcome to the Nonprofit Help Desk. My name is Amy Fiore. I am the director of this program, which is part of the JCC of Greater Coney Island. We are here for you, nonprofits, to provide technical and capacity building support for the various needs of running a nonprofit organization during trying times, during everyday times, during whenever it is that you need some support. We offer a series of live workshops, which this is one of. We have several coming up. In fact, one tomorrow, talking about capital campaigns, in a couple weeks, talking about logo and brand identity, some tips for practices, best practices for nonprofits, and getting started with grants. All of those are coming up. And then to be announced very shortly, we also have several more workshops that are focused on discretionary funding for New York City. So keep your eyes peeled on our website and in your email for information about that. At our website at nphd.org, you can also find our archive of past workshops. Everything is available there, and all of this is made possible from members of the New York City Council and their discretionary funding and generous support from Sobel Bixel Consulting for Nonprofits. We also have an active LinkedIn community that we hope you will check out. And then last but absolutely not least, we really are a help desk. On your screen, you can see the various ways that we are supporting nonprofit organizations. We invite you to visit us at NPHD, complete a short form that allows us to learn a little bit more about your organization, have some framework on what it is you do, and then we are asking you to be specific about what your questions are, whether it's how do I make sure my mission statement is saying everything I need it to, or how do I figure out this thorny legal problem, or how do I become a 501c3? All sorts of topics. We can pair you with a one-on-one expert to be able to meet with them. And all you have to do is fill out a form for us. Please be really specific in those requests, though. Think of us as your Geek Squad or your help desk in any way that you need support. Without any further ado, two of our experts who are on the facilities panel with our facilitator panel with the Nonprofit Help Desk. We have Laura Cohen and Rosemary Osman speaking today about how to guard your reputation. Laura, I transfer it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. I am Rosemary Ostman. I am founder and CEO of RoseCom. We are a strategic communications firm working with clients in a variety of sectors. We're based in New Jersey. And one of those sectors is nonprofit. We work with several nonprofits ranging in size. We also have been facilitators with the Nonprofit Help Desk for the last few years. So I see at least some familiar names on the attendee list today. We have presented other webinars on issues related to using public relations and media visibility to achieve your growth objectives and others. So this is our very first session focused on crisis communications and reputation management, and we are excited to present to you today.
Thank you, Ro. Hi, everyone. I'm Lara Cohn. I have about 30 years experience in the communications industry, and I've worked one-on-one with many of you at the Nonprofit Help Desk over the last few years to help cultivate stories, and that's using a variety of channels to help you share your news. So thank you for joining us today. So let's just go through the agenda quickly while you're here and what you're going to be learning. Every nonprofit is vulnerable to a crisis, no matter how big or small. If you don't think you are, you are. Crisis communications planning is really vital for any organization. Having that clear protocol not only protects you when external events trigger a crisis, but also helps your employees understand their responsibility, how to avoid actions that can unintentionally cause harm to either themselves or to you, their employer. So today, what we're here to talk about, we're going to take you through the crisis communications. That's the anatomy of a crisis. You'll learn what a crisis is and isn't. We'll discuss information leaks, the stages of crisis management, how to plan for that tough news. It's all about planning. Key media do's and don'ts. And then we'll end with some real world examples, give you some examples of things that have happened to large nonprofits as well as some smaller ones. Okay, but first, you've been to our presentations, you know we love polls. So we are going to start with finding out a little bit more about you. And I'm going to launch the first poll. If you can please tell us, has your nonprofit ever faced a crisis? Oh, look at these answers pouring in. I think we have a good amount of you who have answered. So that's 70% of you have faced a crisis. Very interesting. It'll be interesting to hear how you have planned for that. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to turn it over to Rosemary to tell you more about what a crisis is.
Great. So thank you for answering the question and giving us a sense of how many of you have been through this before. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of what is a crisis and how do you prepare for and manage a crisis, I want to suggest that we reframe our thinking about crises. For a lot of organizations, a crisis is something that we just hope and pray never happens to us. We try to avoid it at all costs. But the reality is, crises do happen. No matter how much we plan, they do occur. So I'm starting here with sort of a glass half empty view on crisis communications. And this is a definition from our professional association, the Public Relations Society of America. Crisis communication is protecting and defending an individual, a company, or an organization that is facing a challenge to its reputation. These challenges can involve legal, ethical, and financial standing. That sounds really intense, and it is. But if we think about a challenge, and I'm sorry, Lara, to go to the next slide. If we think about crises not as a challenge, but really as an opportunity, one way I like to reframe my own thinking and the thinking of our clients is to think about a crisis from a narrative perspective. So if you are an author writing a story and you needed to build a crisis into the narrative, this is the way a crisis is defined. It's an event that forces the protagonist to change and reveals their true character. It poses a real choice between incompatible options with meaningful stakes. This is the point when the reader becomes invested in the story. For me, that is a much more intriguing way to think about and to view a potential crisis. For your organization and for the leaders of your organizations, this is an opportunity for you to potentially change. Perhaps the crisis is holding up a mirror and telling you something you need to do to change. And or it's an opportunity to show your constituents who you really are, your true character as an organization. The stakes are meaningful, and this is the point at which the reader, or in your case, your constituents, really become invested in your organization's story. They are paying attention when you are facing a crisis, and you have an opportunity to show them who you really are.
Right. Thank you, Ro. Poll question number 2. So now that we know that most of you had faced a crisis, let's find out if you have a crisis protocol in place now. So I'm going to launch that next poll. Interesting answers coming in. Wait for a few more of you to answer. about 80% of you who have answered. Well, it's interesting. So we have 42% of you who have said yes, that you do, and 58% have not put a crisis protocol in place. So a little bit higher on the no side. That's great. Well, hopefully today you'll learn why you need one, and we'll help you put that in place.
Well, that is a great setup for why we're here today. I want to start by talking about the anatomy of a crisis so we understand what it is that we are looking for and what we are preparing for. And in our experience, a lot of organizations think about something that is going to happen to their organization. Some sort of external event occurs and creates a crisis for the organization. But in reality, there are many situations where you may actually cause the crisis. And if you haven't thought in advance about this, you may not be able to predict accurately where your vulnerabilities are. So let's talk about a few examples here. Something that could happen to your organization. There's a hacker who's gotten into your organization and has access to the financial information of your donors, for example. A natural disaster has occurred and people can't access your facility, or maybe your employees or your program participants have been impacted. There is targeted violence. Someone is actually threatening your organization. Maybe there's some backlash. Maybe there are people who don't agree with your organization and the work that you do. And there is a mounting public backlash that is an external force, but it's creating a crisis situation for you. And of course, something like an injury or an accident that happened on your watch, even in spite of putting the best plans in place to prevent that, it still becomes your crisis. And then just a handful of things that your organization may inadvertently cause that leads to you being in a crisis situation. Misconduct by an employee or an executive or even a volunteer. When a volunteer is working on behalf of your nonprofit, whatever they do, even maybe perhaps something that they do when they're not physically present at your organization, can create reputational damage for you. There might be information that is confidential that was meant for a very small group of internal audience members, and that gets leaked, and that creates a crisis situation. Or there could be an adverse financial or legal event. Someone could be suing you. There could be a situation that involves authorities. Maybe there's a situation where you had to call 911 and the information's out on the scanner. And now the media knows that there's an emergency happening at your organization. So we are not here today to scare anyone, but we do want you to think about all the ways that you might face a crisis so that you know how to prepare for it.
Yeah.
And then the second phase of the anatomy of a crisis, now that we've talked about what they are, is to also understand they follow different timelines. And in order to properly manage the crisis and not have it damage your reputation, you need to understand which of these timelines your crisis fits within. The first is a real life creeping example. This is when there's something that's been happening, sort of brewing slowly at your organization, and it crescendos into a crisis. So we work with a lot of schools, for example, and summer camps and after school programs. And we've had a situation where there was inappropriate material discovered at the school. It was there for an older audience that was there for a specific period of time, but then it gets in the hands of the wrong people. Maybe there have been some acts of hate conducted by people who are part of the program. An isolated incident is one thing, but maybe there's a sequence that all of a sudden turns into a much bigger problem for you. We also have situations with record keeping where there's funding that is coming sometimes by the government to a program. And if record keeping isn't where it needs to be, that could be something that happens slowly over time. And then when it is exposed, it is an immediate crisis, but it's something that, again, has been brewing over a long stretch of time. Then we have a slow burn. This is a situation where maybe there's an investigative reporter who calls your organization and says, I've gotten information that something nefarious is going on, and I'm going to start peeling back the layers to find out what's going on. Maybe they're writing a book and they're including your organization, or maybe the book is about your organization, and you have a long time to actually work through this and to do what you need to do to protect the reputation. We have this a lot with our clients where we'll get contacted by the media, and sometimes it takes years for the story to come out. And it's something we have to manage very slowly over time. And then there's sudden. So the creeping, where something happens slowly over time. We didn't think it was going to turn into a crisis, but then because of all that accumulated activity, it feels sudden, but it actually was building over time. We've got the slow burn, where we find out quickly that something difficult is going to happen to us, but we have a long time to work on it. And then there's the sudden examples. And this is where we didn't think it was happening. We didn't know about it. And all of a sudden, it is a massive crisis sitting on our lap. This could be an accident with transportation. This could be constituents having a confrontation with one another, and somebody who videotapes it and it's all over social media. Maybe we have a staff member who showed up at a controversial event and their photo was taken, and someone identified them as our employee, and we now have a pile-on of complaints and concerns coming at our organization. So we like to share these 3 timelines because it's another way to understand the anatomy of a crisis and to help us think about how to best predict and to manage them as they unfold. And then last point there I just want to make is, it's always best to be prepared. So I know a number of you from our poll said that you do have a protocol in place, and that's great news. The key to managing your reputation in any kind of crisis is to not be caught flat-footed. People will be able to forgive you for just about anything, depending on the way you respond and how quickly you respond. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is making sure you're in a position to be able to do that. I want to talk a little bit about information leaks, because this is something that you should be able to avoid. And we see time and time again organizations getting into bad situations because of this. And I'm going to share some real life examples. So you may be thinking, oh, we're buttoned up, we're fine, this won't happen to us. But it can happen, and it does happen. We've had situations where someone prints something out. They print out an email thread, they print out a letter, they take some notes in a meeting, leave it in an unsecured location, and it's discovered by someone. We actually had a client who left a draft of a reduction in force notice in a taxi cab in New York, and that ended up turning into media coverage. Be careful with computers and leaving things open on computers. If you have something open on a computer and you walk away from it, and someone else sits down at that desk, even if it's not in a public area, that can leave you vulnerable. We've also seen situations now with people working remotely and using tools like Slack and Teams. They can inadvertently put information in the wrong channel. And so they thought they were saying something directly to one person, and now all of a sudden it is shared with a broader group. And once it's there and you can take a screenshot of it, it's too late to take it back. Be careful about email threads. Sometimes people forward or add someone into an email thread later and forget that there was something discussed earlier that is highly confidential. We also have seen recently people are using AI tools to record and transcribe meetings, and things are said before the full group of participants show up to a meeting, and then the notes from the meeting are shared automatically because of these AI tools with everyone who attended. And there's information that was only meant for one person is now being shared more broadly. We've also seen people in these group meetings share the wrong screen and share confidential information. So if you know that you are a presenter, like Lara is sharing our presentation today, make sure that you have closed everything that is confidential out from your desktop and that you are prepared to only share the information that you intended to share. And then sometimes, in spite of our best efforts, information can be shared publicly on a newswire if you're using a newswire to issue a statement or a press release, or on social media. It's amazing. You put together a protocol, you have a timeline, you have responsibilities assigned to different individuals, but there are absolutely times when people thought they were supposed to share something on social earlier or later. So they can forget to share it or they can share it too early. So just making sure that all of that is buttoned up and you've thought all of this through in advance of especially sharing any information that is sensitive in nature. It's also helpful to think about the stages of crisis management. So those of you who have a protocol put together, your protocol hopefully is grounded in the 3 stages of crisis management. So preparing, we hope that everyone from this conversation will take the time to premeditate potential crisis scenarios and to plan for them. So that's a big part of it, is making sure you have everything prepared in advance. Then there is the communicating in a crisis, making sure you have everything buttoned up and ready to go. As I mentioned earlier, people will forgive you for just about anything, but not if you are flat-footed, not if you wait too long or you weren't prepared, so you end up saying something that sends the wrong message. And then we always have to learn from every crisis. So building into your protocol the steps that you can take to make sure that you effectively recover and rebuild and learn from that crisis that you just experienced. So what goes into a crisis protocol? We've been throwing that term around today. And for those of you who are the majority of you who don't have one, I think it's helpful if we talk about the key elements of a crisis protocol. I mentioned the scenarios. Get with your leadership team and do a brainstorm and think about what are the kinds of crises that could happen to us, and try to categorize them into 3, 4, or 5 different categories. So I mentioned earlier employee misconduct, an accident that causes an injury or worse. I have been doing this for 30 years. We have never not been able to anticipate a crisis scenario. And when you have those scenarios in place, then you can start to build all the pieces that you need to be able to act quickly. So building these scenarios is fundamental to having a good crisis protocol in place. Who are the audiences? Who do we need to communicate with should this happen? There are employees, there are board members, there are donors, there are program participants, there are investors, there's the media. Mapping that out so that when you build that protocol, you haven't forgotten someone. You haven't overlooked anyone. Getting your crisis response team together is also critically important. Who are the people that we are going to call when this happens on a holiday, on a weekend when people aren't sitting at their computers? You don't need it to be the entire organization. You need it to be the people who are going to help you execute so that you can protect the organization. You can move quickly, have all of their contact information, not just emails, but phone numbers, cell phone numbers for texting so that you can immediately hit those individuals and let them know that something is happening and that you need their attention. Thinking through the impact of whatever it is that you are facing quickly. What could happen here? What's the worst case scenario as a result of this? And let's make sure we have thought that all the way through and are acting accordingly. Will the media show up? Is there a potential for on-site coverage? Do we think they are going to show up with cameras, and are we ready for that? What do we need to do to get ready for that? And you should always have someone in that crisis response team who is responsible for monitoring the news immediately. You don't know, they may not call you. They may start covering a story before they've even reached out to you. So making sure that you have someone whose responsibility it is to start monitoring and also looking at social media immediately and reporting out to that crisis response team anything that they are seeing. Having the messaging, once you have those scenarios, you can put some framework messaging together. You obviously are going to need the details from your specific crisis, but you can put that together and have it in place. And also think through, who are we going to put forward as our messenger? Having a trusted face and voice to put out in the face of a crisis is arguably more important than what you say. You need to humanize your organization and think about who that trusted voice is in advance. Anticipate all the tough questions that you might get so that you're not surprised by anything. And again, I've been doing this for 30 years. We've been able to anticipate every question. We have never once, touch wood, been surprised by a tough question. And then, as I mentioned earlier with the messaging, you can, in advance of having a crisis, once you have those scenarios, you can actually start to put together some templates and scripts. What's our media statement? What are the basics of that? What is the call script going to look like? And then really mapping it all out. So you have the messaging, you have the materials, you know who the audiences are that you need to reach. Think about all the ways you can reach them. Do you have an email database? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have social media channels? Do you do town halls? Is that what is normal for your organization? What are all those different communications channels that you can tap into in the event that you're dealing with something where you need to reach people? Great. Steve says he has a WhatsApp group messaging. That's exactly the kind of thing that you would build into that communications matrix, just to make sure you know what you have at your disposal and what you can tap into quickly. Training your employees once you have the protocol in place is also really important, so everyone knows what the organization has done. It plants the seeds in their minds about what is a crisis, which also may help moderate their behavior, and they can think about what they can do to prevent a crisis. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the post-crisis analysis. There are always things that we can learn. Nothing ever goes perfectly. We just need it to go well enough to prevent reputational damage, but there are always lessons to be learned that can be applied to future crises.
Thank you, Ro. So you've planned, you've prepared, now you're in a crisis. So how you navigate and how you position your response publicly to the audience members that Ro mentioned, whether that's your donors, your board, the media, the outside public, really will determine whether you maintain trust or lose it. These 5 principles that we've put together will help guide you into communicating with transparency, with responsibility, and credibility. The first is honesty. You want to acknowledge the issue with verified facts. You want to start by recognizing the situation clearly, truthfully. Only use confirmed information. You never want to guess or speculate. If somebody says to you, well, wasn't this the person or that the person, you always want to make sure that you have all the facts in place and not reiterate any negative or incorrect information. And you want to make it clear that you're committed to transparency. The next is explanation. Share what is known, and again, avoid speculation. People want answers. They want them quickly. We're in that world that everyone wants to know something before it happens, but that doesn't mean you should fill in any gaps. Be clear what you do know, be clear what you don't know, be honest about what's still being investigated or that you are working with the investigation to help get those answers. The next is action. You want to outline next steps and accountability. You always want to explain what you are doing in response, what steps are being taken to address the issue, who is responsible, and then how progress will be tracked. So they should note that there is those next steps and there is a resolution. Apology. When appropriate, you do want to express empathy or regret. So if the situation warrants it, you want to acknowledge any harm or inconvenience caused. Just a perfect example as I'm thinking today, and if you live in the area, if you've ever gone to Newark Airport, there's many challenges going to Newark Airport on United this week. They are out there, the airport, the airlines, they're acknowledging the situation and they are showing that there is an inconvenience, and apologizing, showing empathy can really go a long way in restoring that public trust. And then lastly is learning. You want to communicate what improvements you're doing to prevent this from happening again. So demonstrate that you learn from the experience. You will share what you are doing moving forward to reduce the chance of it happening again. And these are principles that really will help you anchor your messaging in credibility and keep your reputation intact.
So with those best practices in mind, here are some questions that when you get your crisis response team together, you can ask yourselves. Really having a great statement, a great response is very important in those early moments of dealing with a crisis. So what Lara shared is like a high level philosophical approach to tone and voice. But these are the very specific questions you can ask yourselves to get the information that you need to share. So you need to make sure that you have explained what happened and why. It doesn't need to be done in a way that is overly sensational. It can be very factual, but you need to be clear, especially if you are writing an email to your constituents to explain to them if they haven't yet heard about it. And even if they have heard about it, they need to hear the facts from you. You need to ask yourselves, could we have prevented this? Because that will give you a clue as to your accountability and how you can reassure people moving forward that it won't happen again. What are you doing now? How are you dealing with it? People need to hear what you're doing. And again, if this is something that could have been prevented, what are you doing? What steps are you taking to ensure it won't happen again? Because that will ease people's nerves. Is the public or the community still at risk? Is this an ongoing issue? And then I think we've made the accountability point very clear. What are those next steps? What is the accountability? So these are some useful questions to ask yourself as you're thinking through those scenarios and you're building out statement scripts and emails and letters that you are going to be sending out to inform people in those early moments of facing a crisis.
So you are now in front of a reporter and the media is asking you these questions. Here are some best practices and some common pitfalls that we've come across in our time of working with the media. You always want to use a trained spokesperson for all public statements. And like we said in the prepared area, you want to designate that person or persons in advance. They should be able to speak on behalf of the organization. and they should be fully media trained. So they should go through those questions, the hard questions, the scenarios in advance, that they are ready with their key points to speak to the media. And as well, make sure they are fully briefed on the situation as it occurs, that they have all the facts. And the next one is stick to facts and the confirmed facts and your key messages. You really want to avoid improvising or speculating. You want to focus on what the verified information is. You want to repeat your core messages to reinforce that clarity and trust. And then, as we mentioned, you want to monitor, as we're monitoring the media, especially on social media, you will get questions, comments. You want to have someone who is monitoring that and responding to that. So we know that this is going to move fast. Everything is going to live online. So how you acknowledge those questions and concerns, even correcting misinformation. Sometimes people will post something that is not correct, that you want to make sure that you even, reflecting your tone and being respectful, make sure that those questions and facts are correct. Then you don't want to speculate, assign blame, speak off the record. I know a lot of you might have heard that before, that someone might say to you, I just want to speak off the record for a second, or just for background. Nothing is truly off the record. You should always speak as if everything could be published. You don't know if they're recording it, they're taking notes. As we said, AI today could be listening in. So pretend that everything that you say to anybody is on the record. Don't share any confidential information or personal information. I know you might have good intentions, that you want to share someone's phone number or email address to get in contact with them. You want to keep individuals, partners, all your operations private, because that can really violate trust, your policy, and possibly legal implications. And then last is don't delay or ignore inquiries. Again, when a reporter is, when a producer or reporter is contacting you that they heard this story and they want to speak with someone, silence can actually be perceived as indifference or worst, incompetence. So even a brief response, such as, thank you for reaching out, we're currently gathering information and all the necessary details, and we'll follow up shortly. Just that quickly getting back to them demonstrates that you're accountable and you're keeping the lines, of communication open. And again, by following these principles, they'll help you maintain your reputation, public trust, and it'll help you manage your communications, even under pressure. So most of you have websites, or you have social media platforms. These are essential tools, as we all know, for and channels for delivering information. Within a crisis, it really is critical that they deliver timely information and accurate information. This is where a small issue can really escalate quickly if it lives online, and it could live online indefinitely if it's the wrong information. So negative content, and we'll give an example of it in a little bit, even a tweet can resurface long after the crisis has passed. So you want to make sure to be careful everything that you put out there, as well as what other people are saying about you. And then once the immediate crisis has passed, it's really important to shift from what we call reactive communication. So you're making sure that the crisis is contained, to proactive communications, which is a consistent flow of positive content. And how you can regain that momentum and do that is by refreshing your website regularly. That's with timely information, relevant content, so blog posts, news releases, anything that you can keep refreshing your website so people see the positive news. Issuing news releases when appropriate to share updates is another way that you can get the word out there on your channels, as well as to the public. And if you were using a news wire, for example, that's really going to help build your SEO to drive up that positive news. So it'll hopefully bring down the negative news, and they'll see the positive stories, the good news first. And then you really want to resume your regular social media posting to reestablish your presence, reinforce your key messages. Again, builds up that trust, builds up that positive news. And remember, as always, consistency is showing your audience that you're focused, you're responsive, and that you're moving forward.
Lara, before we jump into the examples,
Yeah.
and I want to make sure we'll go quickly on the examples because
Yeah,
I want to make sure people have time for questions. And again, feel free to put them into the chat. But I do want to say that everything Lara just said is spot on. One thing to keep in mind, and this is a question we get from a lot of our clients, especially smaller nonprofits, they're trying to determine what is that point that we need to go out onto our website and let everybody know what has happened and how we're dealing with it. How proactive do we need to be on social media? You know, we've only had a handful of people even reach out to us about this. Is it at that point that we need to go out and broadcast what's going on? And I think that's important. Lara just walked you through how you can use all those tools to be transparent and to be proactive. But you should always work with your communications counsel on a risk reward analysis when you are confronted with a crisis. Because if it is relatively contained, maybe you don't need to go proactively onto social media and tell the world. Maybe you don't need to put that statement up on your website just yet. So you can take it incrementally, and that's why having the protocol in place is so important, because you have all that mapped out and you're ready to go. But you can take it step by step in order to manage the crisis. And then you will know when you hit that point when the risk of not saying something more publicly is greater than the reward, where you are at that point where people, the inbound inquiries are starting to increase, the media are reaching out to you, people are posting on social media about it, and you can no longer hope to contain it to a limited number of communications channels, and you do need to start spreading the word. So I think that's an important element, in the planning process, is understanding what that point of inflection is.
Yeah. So we're just going to take you through a few examples, one national, bigger, well-known organization, and then we'll take you through some local ones that are a little bit smaller. Here's one from the American Red Cross. This is a high-profile nonprofit. Many of you know the Red Cross. And there was a Red Cross staffer, someone who was on their social media team, who managed their social media account, who was out for the night. She was having fun out with her friends, and she tweeted about having Dogfish Head beer when she was out. Now, the problem was that she tweeted it on the Red Cross's Twitter page instead of her own Twitter page. When you're managing, especially if you're on the phone and you're managing social media, it could be really easy to post and to see which is your name and which is the company name. And she accidentally did that. But, oh, and I should point out that this was at 11:30 at night. So most people were in bed asleep while she was out, but the mistake was noticed. And here's what happened next. The Red Cross issued a very lighthearted but professional apology. They assured their followers that the Red Cross is sober. Then the beer company, Dogfish Beer, Dogfish Head Brewery, you can see it there, they then joined in the conversation. And they retweeted the post, but they also encouraged donations to the Red Cross. Then the Red Cross followed up on their blog, thanking their supporters for understanding the situation. They wanted to reinforce their humanity. And what they said was, in the meantime, we found so many of you to be sympathetic and understanding. While we are a 130-year-old humanitarian organization, We're also made up of human beings. Thanks for not only getting that, but for turning our faux pas into something good. So, what can we all learn from that? I think this example really emphasizes the importance of keeping your personal and organizational accounts separate. You should always double check, triple check which one you're posting from, especially when you're on your cell phone and you're out late at night, or maybe just don't post late at night. Maybe wait until you get home or the next morning to post to make sure it is on the right account. It was a relatively harmless tweet, but really imagine the harm that could have been done if she had said something political, if she had something controversial or something that didn't align with the Red Cross's values. This could have been a much bigger situation. And as you saw with the Red Cross here, the timing, of course, if a mistake happens, as it did, acknowledge it, respond quickly, stay on brand, and move on. So we give the Red Cross kudos for something. And this happened a long time ago, I will say, in 2011. So you could see how the social media was being used, but even back then.
Yet it still happens today.
Oh, so much. You really have to always make sure, is that my icon, is that my face, or is that the company's face?
Now I want to talk about two much smaller organizations, but where the stakes were actually a lot higher. And I'm not going, these were both clients of Roscom, so I'm not going to expose names to protect them. But I do want to talk about what happened. They are, like I said, are relatively small organizations, but handled these situations very well. And I should say that in both instances, they contacted us as the crisis was unfolding. They did not have protocols in place. The one on the top there is not a nonprofit. It's a gymnastics studio in the suburbs of New Jersey that had hired a gymnastics instructor, went through all the proper protocols when hiring that individual. And unfortunately, within the first 6 months of his joining that gym, was caught taking inappropriate photos of some of the girls that were part of his program. And the owner of the gym was contacted by authorities, made aware of the situation, and had mere hours to decide how to respond before authorities were going to announce the charges to the media. This happened over the weekend, which is often when these things materialize. We worked with the owner of the gym to come up with a statement to explain what her hiring protocols were, that she had conducted a background check, that she follows all the best practices of her professional organizations. And in spite of all of that, this happened. She took responsibility, she expressed concern, and she also put in place counseling for affected families. So that's really the accountability piece, that she acknowledged the impact and took responsibility for it. So that statement, we helped her draft a communication that went out to families. We also drafted a media statement. That media statement ended up in all of the media coverage, and within 48 hours, it died down. That was a few years ago. This story has resurfaced just within the last few weeks because there is a reporter, a different reporter at NJ.com, who has done the research and found out that there was a loophole that allowed him to be hired. He actually had been charged with similar charges before, but it was when he was a minor, so it wasn't on his record, which is how he passed the background check. And this reporter is now trying to get a law passed to close that loophole, and wanted our client at this gymnastics studio to speak out again about what happened and her thoughts as a business owner relative to how someone like him could get hired for a position working with children. And she appreciates what he's trying to achieve, but this is not her story to continue to push. She did all the right things. She took accountability, and she put measures in place to take care of her families, and she needs to move on. So we gave him another statement, and we are now waiting for that follow-on story to appear. It's been several weeks. The point being that even when you have moved past a crisis, if it's part of a bigger trend or narrative, it can come back up years later, and it can come back up repeatedly. So that's something else important to remember about a crisis. And the second one, I'm not going to read the full letter because I really do want to stop and leave time for you to ask questions. This was a summer camp program that is in the New York area that uses a third-party transportation company. And unfortunately, one summer, a few protocols were broken that led to a camper being left on a camp bus. She did not get off at her bus stop. And all of a sudden, the organization that runs this camp started getting panicked calls from the family. They did thankfully find her, and she was healthy and fine, but definitely emotionally impacted by what happened. She had fallen asleep, as our campers often do after a busy day at camp. And they really needed to step up and explain, as I said earlier, exactly what happened and what they were doing. So you can see here, this was the email that went out to families. This never turned into media coverage because of the way that they handled it. They jumped on it immediately. They apologized. They took responsibility, and they put new procedures in place to prevent it from happening again. It was a hot topic of conversation in a private Facebook parenting group in the community where this camp is. So fortunately, they had an employee who was part of that private community, because you can't join those as a business or as a nonprofit. So we were able to monitor that conversation and make a decision about whether to weigh in or not. But being able to get to the families quickly and explain definitely protected their reputation and prevented them from having to do really anything more than communicate directly to the families who send their kids to the camp. Okay, here are the takeaways. We can leave them up, but I do want to stop now while we still have 6 minutes. And I don't see any questions in the chat, but I would welcome anyone to share any experiences or any questions that they have, either in the chat or by turning your camera on or raising your hand. See anyone?
I see Steve has a question.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, just a question and a comment. And I think we have learned a lot from the pandemic. And it's not only illness, I mean healthcare. So it's not only stuff like measles or our patients with fever and COVID, but also for the staff who, if they're like, we had a big leak kind of flood in the office, but we are able to work hybrid. So in our crisis, in our case, our crisis, we have the option to work from home. Let's say there's a big snowstorm or something explode in Manhattan. You are then able to have the flexibility to work from home with full access to your desktop. So this is something we have been using that is excellent, and it might be a protocol since we learned so much from the pandemic on all these virtual platforms that we can communicate with is something that should be taken into consideration. I don't know how many people are back in the office or still hybrid, but it's an option.
Absolutely. I agree that it's getting a little cliche at this point, but it is a silver lining of the pandemic that we learned how to have backup plans where we can stay operational. But also, Steve, to your point, we have this new way of communicating with constituents. Being able to offer a town hall where we aren't just sending an email. Sometimes sending an email is fine and it's easier because it contains the messaging. And if we feel like that will satisfy people, we can stay with an email, but maybe we send an email to get out quickly to everyone all at once. And then we invite them to a town hall so they can see real people and they can hear it from those people and also ask their questions. So not only can we use these new platforms and ways of working to stay operational in the face of a crisis, but we can also tap into them as communications channels. It's a very good point.
One of the things that we use to contact all of our patients at the same time is constant contact.
Yes.
So we start mining our patient communication through that, including social media.
I think from the media standpoint as well, what's interesting that we saw during the pandemic, which has slowed down a little bit, but has continued, are interviews over Zoom. So a lot of the TV stations, if they were going to come to cover an event or meet you somewhere, or have you come into their studio and do a sit down, they don't need to do that anymore. They can just do an interview over Zoom. So it's immediate. They can get you on the phone, on the Zoom, really within minutes, and they expect you to be camera ready and available, on your computer. It saves them time, it saves you time.
Steve, your point about constant contact also reminds me, make sure your database is ready to roll, not just for the good news, but for the bad news. You do not want to be scrambling, trying to find email addresses and making sure they're current in the face of the crisis.
It's a database that we constantly update. If people have new email addresses, we take out the old ones, we get notification that it bounced. So we try to get the new information up. And it's something that a database that we keep relevant all the time. I mean, you might miss one or two or a handful, but I agree. It's something that you have to consistently monitor. It's a very, very effective tool. And as you mentioned just now, we just had a television interview to talk about thalassemia for Thalassemia International Day, and it was done by Zoom.
Yep.
People were in their homes doing the interview.
Yeah.
Yeah. And back to your point, I know we're on time, so this will be the last thing I say. Back to your point on email, I think it's also important to remember that even though your constituents are following you on social shouldn't necessarily be, and probably should never be, the first place you go to communicate as a crisis is unfolding. Because only a small percentage of people who follow you are ever going to see what you post on social. Putting a thoughtful, comprehensive message over email directly to your constituents should happen before you turn to social. Great. Any other questions before we wrap up? Seeing none, I will turn it back to Amy.
Thank you, Ro and Laura, for an excellent session. This was very compelling. I was furiously taking notes as it went along. I really appreciate both of you. I do see one question that asked if we will be able to get a copy of the webinar. The webinar and every webinar that we offer through the Nonprofit Help Desk goes up at nphd.org. So keep an eye out within the next week or so. We will get that up there for you. And we also have another session coming up tomorrow called So You Want to Do a Capital Campaign, where you can learn about what that actually entails and what you should think about in terms of planning for that. As I mentioned, we have other webinars coming up. If you want to follow up with Rosemary and Laura to actually talk about some specific questions that you have, again, you can fill out the form at nphd.org in order to get one-on-one expert support with them. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you this time tomorrow for yet another session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.